So now I'd like to bring up our guest speaker for the night, testimony from Mr. Richard Flatt.
Awesome. All right. Hi, my name is Richard, and I'm a believer who struggles with self-worth, rebellion, and health issues. Hi. I was born at a very young age. My parents were believers when I was born, and some of my first memories were nursery at church. And my mom used to go to Bible studies, and I would bite kids while in the nursery to get toys that I wanted to use. I say, hey, don't laugh. It's only stupid if it doesn't work. And it worked almost all the time. It was almost all the time was met with spankings afterwards. And I guess I was enough of a terror that the nursery volunteers would give my mom dirty looks when I was dropped off. And it was bad enough that my dad gave written permission and directions for the volunteers to spank me when needed. And I remember hitting some kid over the head with a stick and throwing pieces of safety glass at a girl so that I could ride a trike in preschool. Honestly, I wish I didn't have such a good memory. And I was thinking about it this week and going, that's preschool carjacking, isn't it? And needless to say, years later, when my son was expelled from preschool and suspended from kindergarten, I knew where he got it from, and I was able to deal with it graciously. As they say, the stump doesn't fall too far from the tree. At age 4, at a 5-day child evangelism club that was being held in the park across the street from our house in Vancouver, Washington, I gave my life to Jesus. And I remember that I wanted to have my many sins forgiven, and I wanted to be friends with Jesus, and I wanted to go to heaven. Elementary school was a nightmare, and I was always torn. I would live one way at, can you folks hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. I would live one way at home in church and another way at school, and I was a crazy mix of a kid who loved Jesus, got taught verses and missionary stories at home, always won awards for Bible memory, and wanted to see everyone come to Jesus, but it could just as easily want to fight at school and do whatever I thought would make me cool and get me noticed by girls. In 5th grade, we moved to Spokane, and 2 stories from that year. Number 1 was I let bullies punch me as hard as they could, telling them that I didn't feel any pain. I thought that would make me look really tough and impress girls. It was a lie. Little did I know that not feeling any pain is a symptom of leprosy and not a cool trait to have. 2, I had a pencil from church that had the church's name on it at school, and I can't remember if I won it or if I took it. Even if I stole it, someone stole it from me. Give me back my pencil. That's my pencil. That's the church I go to. And the reply I got back from the kid was, you don't go to church. Ouch. My life didn't show Jesus. In 6th and 7th grade, that was awful. And Sam was a kid who was held back a year, and he was a big, tough bully. And he tormented me through 6th grade. And in 7th grade class, when the teacher had left, he walked over and hit me on the back of the head. And I turned and glared at him, and he said something, and it was on. And I hit him back for the first time, and we fought. And I remember hitting him in the stomach and bummed that I didn't knock the air out of him. And we wrestled, and he had me in such a way that I was face down, and his arm was under my face. And he said, don't bite me. I wasn't even thinking about biting him. I hadn't bit anybody in Spokane. And we got up and we went back to our seats before the teacher got back. And I got 2 reactions. One, some of the kids were glad that I stood up to the bully. And the other was way worse. I had a target on my back. Not only did Sam want to fight me again, but for me it had been a victory. But tough kids would use this awful logic on me. So you can beat Sam up? I can't beat Sam up. So are you saying that you can beat me up? Yes was the answer. Not that I wanted to fight any of them, because I didn't. I think all the football players, soccer players, wrestlers, trouble kids wanted to pound me, and it was an awful lonely time and lots of fights. And halfway through my freshman year in school, we were running laps in gym, and there was one kid who kept on running up behind me and shoving me, and probably about the fourth or fifth time, I'd had enough. And I hauled off, and I hit him in the throat as hard as I could, and we fought, and the PE teacher broke it up. And he took us to his office and made us apologize. But at lunch, he came looking for me with some of his friends and one of his brothers. He had several older brothers who were all bad news, spending time in juvenile hall for all sorts of offenses. And it was it. I had stirred up a hornet's nest, and there was no putting the hornets back in the nest. And I went home, and lying on my bed that night at age 14, I said, God, my life sucks, and I know that if I let you run it, it wouldn't be like that anymore. And that was a huge turning point in my life. At that point, I became serious about living my Christian life, and I wanted to share my faith and see other people come to Christ. And I'd like to say that I never sinned again, but that was not the case. The problem for me is this: my sin after coming to Christ is willful. I know better. 1 Samuel 15:23, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Stubbornness is as bad as worshiping idols. So, because you have rejected the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. I can't plead ignorance. In that verse for King Saul, because of his sin, he was going to lose his reign. And I wonder about the consequences of sin. I did a lot of good things during my high school years, bringing kids to youth group and camp and Christian concerts. But at that time, I was not very gracious, judgmental, full of lust. Someone asked me to describe myself in one word at that time. My answer was pious. And I cringe now that I said that. And I ran into that person years later. And not only did she not remember that, she didn't remember me either, which is great in my book. I really don't like people remembering my failures and shortcomings. I was planning on becoming a youth pastor and a missionary, and I was thinking Italy sounded like a really cool place to do both. And after my senior year of high school, I went on a short-term missions trip all over Europe, including Italy. But we stopped in Scotland, and my heart broke for the Scots. Watching the kids hang out by the phone booth, drinking and kicking each other, and when I found out that there was no good youth groups, it seemed unfair. I'm partially Scottish. It is one of those, only by the grace of God did I escape this. And I went off to Bible school, taking all my Bible classes and missions and youth ministry, all with going back to Scotland on my mind, planning on doing a youth center and a church. One of my roommates at Bible school confessed that he had a porn mag in our dorm room. I threw it out, but I looked at it first. And he thanked me at that time for getting rid of it, but since he's completely walked away from faith, even in a Christian bubble, people aren't safe. And after I got my AA in biblical studies, I went to another Bible school at a large church in San Diego because they had sent out missionaries to Scotland before. And while I was going to school, sometime I would stop by a liquor store and get porn magazines. Sometimes I would have the urge to go, and I would fight so hard not to, and my heart would race, and I would cough and get a dry throat. It was just I don't know, there was this physical part that was just completely surprised with, how it was affecting my body. I co-led our team on a short-term missions trip for 5 weeks to Grenada, and then I did 3 weeks of ministry in Scotland on my own and saw people get saved. Eventually, I spent 18 months in Scotland and was to become the Associate Director of Inverness Youth for Christ in the Highlands. I was getting all my hopes and dreams, but I was running into visa problems and needed to come back to the States for a while to get that sorted out. And that was when I met my wife, Jill, I met Jill Hansen, who later became my wife. And she too was coming off the mission field, but hers was Bangladesh, where she had been a missionary nurse, started 3 clinics, and worked in 2 orphanages. And the plan was that after we got married, we'd go to Scotland for a while, working in the Highlands, and then move to Glasgow, where she would be able to work with Bengalis, and I would be able to continue to work with the Scots. And then I was supposed to go with her for a year and do ministry in Bangladesh. And after another year of Bible school, I got my bachelor's in youth ministry. And that same week, we were denied a visa to Scotland for the 3rd time. And I had no option to get back. And at this point, I'm 9 years into pursuing ministry in Scotland, and I have lost my identity. We took a youth pastor position in Merced, California. I led the youth program and became familiar with purpose-driven ministry and purpose-driven youth ministry, and went to conferences at Saddleback. Our son Graham was born there, and my pastor up and left, and in the vacuum, in the vacuum of his leaving, the place turned toxic for me to try to continue to work there. And we left and went back to Portland for seminary, and I landed a youth pastor position at a Korean church. And that's where I learned to preach and where our daughter was born. And before graduating, I took a position as the outreach pastor in Weed, California, where they were doing some purpose-driven youth ministry programs. But what I saw was a problem. There were needs and hurts in the church that weren't being addressed, and the church wasn't meeting the needs of the community at large. There was a lot of methamphetamine abuse, alcoholism, and domestic abuse that was going on in Weed. And even with my master's in applied pastoral studies, I was still not equipped to address those issues. And when I found out about Celebrate Recovery, being that it was from Saddleback, I was excited to check into it. And I especially didn't want to reinvent the wheel. There's no use to start up the 7.5 steps of Richard's recovery. And as I researched it, reading the Life Recovery devotional, I realized that it was for me, and that I was one of those people. And we started in 2005, and I knew that I had to lead by example, and I did my 4th step, and unfortunately, without an accountability partner or sponsored. And it wasn't balanced, and I didn't have someone that I could safely share with. I wasn't going to share it with my pastor, who was my boss. So I took a drive, and at the 3rd church that I stopped at in another state, I finally met with a pastor, and I was scared that I was going to chicken out, and I puked up the worst things right away to get it out. And he said, "That was half your life ago. Why are you still beating yourself up over it?" I didn't hear anything that Christ won't forgive. And I went away with tons of guilt that I had been carrying removed. And I had the privilege of having 2 sponsees sharing their 5th step with me, and their sin was different than mine. And may I say that I found some parts abhorrent, but I didn't hear anything that God would forgive. My limits on God's grace were blown away, need I say, as dramatically as the Death Star. Get the Life Recovery devotional and Bible, and the Celebrate Recovery Bible and devotional. They're worth their weight in gold. And I learned more from Celebrate Recovery about grace than I ever did from Bible schools and seminary. Steps 4, 5, and 6 are so life-changing, and I think that for the longest time, I was hung up at step 3. I was previously unable to look at my own life and unable to let God's grace in. There was a budget shortfall, and I was cut from staff. 9 months later, I was able to land a senior pastor position in Eastern Oregon, and I tried to start Celebrate Recovery there. The church grew and doubled in size while we were there. Jill's health got worse, and she had multiple failed heart surgeries. And one day, I was told to meet at Elder so-and-so's house. The elders were there. They prayed to start their meeting and then said, we met in secret yesterday, and we're asking you to tender your resignation. And I was blindsided. That was not part of my plan, and I was gutted. I felt assassinated. I was leaving, not rising to the next level in my career, but feeling like it had ended. And we had to move back to Spokane, where our families were from. 2 weeks later, my wife was working at the hospital in Oregon before starting her new job in Spokane, and it was Sunday. Let me just say this. We were 45 minutes away from the local hospital, and she had talked to the local EMT and ambulance driver and said, if this happens to my heart, what do you have as far as life-saving measures? And they said, we don't have any. All we can do is drive really fast. And she went from an ICU nurse, or she was there as an ICU nurse instead of being on the front row at church as a pastor's wife, and went from ICU nurse to ICU patient as her heart stopped for 3 to 5 minutes. And I raced from Spokane with my Bronco through the worst snowstorm, January 27th of 2008, to get to my wife. And she lived. But every single night for over a year, I had dreams of getting kicked out of church and not being allowed in ministry and being ostracized. And I finally went to a doctor during this time out of ministry and was diagnosed with lupus. And I worked dead-end jobs as no churches were hiring. Maybe the jobs that I wanted didn't know what to do with a former pastor. And we landed at a church close to our house in 2005. And the church was going through the book, Life's Healing Choices, written by CR's John Baker. And I went to the pastor and I said, hey, this is a great book, and it tells people to join Celebrate Recovery at the end. We need to have Celebrate Recovery here, or we're going to be sending people to Celebrate Recovery elsewhere. And so we were able to get it started. And I forgot how much I missed Celebrate Recovery. And it was only a couple of months into Celebrate Recovery when I was diagnosed with colon cancer. And I got up in front of my Celebrate Recovery family and said, I have cancer. And they mobbed me and they prayed for me. And they prayed that there would be no sign of cancer. You've heard that before. They pray, doctors wouldn't be able to find any cancer. And in the preoperative procedure, the doctors couldn't find any sign of cancer. And my first thought was my first thought was, you're an idiot. Try harder. It's still there. And I couldn't get my head around that miracle. And I needed that because I needed to see God's care in my life. And my wife's health keeps taking turns for the worst. And she wrote a book about her time as a missionary and how she got the heart virus and about keeping faith through all the challenges. And it's called In Love with Bangladesh. And she has a pacemaker, heart failure, and kidney failure and GI issues. And my health fell apart, and I was fired for health reasons. And my diagnosis was changed from lupus to fibromyalgia, palindromic rheumatism, and degenerative disc disease. I am so, so, so thankful that Celebrate Recovery uses the full prayer for serenity instead of the shortened one that you see on mugs and posters. Taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. And I don't know how much wasted time and energy and emotion that I'd spent on trying to be supremely happy now. But now I've been able to let go of so much that I felt that I needed for happiness now. And I've been able to get off the treadmill of having to chase supremely happy, and I've been able to trust God in things that I can't see or understand. And God let me lose my dream job in order to save my wife's life. And I couldn't see that previously. I love Friday nights, no matter how crummy I feel. I get there, and maybe I'm sore leaving, but my spirits are lifted. And I've seen so many miracles at Celebrate Recovery. God healed me of cancer. I healed a man's neck this year who had a hangman's break that kills people, and his neck didn't need surgery after they assured him that they were going to have to fuse his neck solid. His doctor said, I don't want to call it a miracle, but... And every week, I see so much life changed, and I'm blessed by it. And I'm planning to be in Celebrate Recovery until the rapture or death, whichever comes first. Someone had shared on Facebook, what would you tell your 17-year-old self, a message if you could in 4 words? I would tell myself, find Celebrate Recovery sooner. You won't believe how important these tools are that you have. And God might very well have you start or be part of a new Celebrate Recovery somewhere and take you to some place where you've never been before. You don't have to reinvent the wheels. You just have to be faithful and learn. 10 years into Celebrate Recovery full time, and I'm still learning and surrendering more and seeing more and more fruit. Let me leave you with my life verse. John 10:10, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I, Jesus, came that they might have life and might have it abundantly. Recovery is about that abundant life that Christ promised. And he wants it for you. And he wants to share it through you. Thanks for letting me share. Thank you. Let me go ahead and close this part in prayer, and then our worship team will go. Oh, dear God, just thank you so much for sending your son and for him dying on the cross for us and for the possibility for us to have the abundant life. And then we get to be supremely happy with you forever in the next, God. Pray that you'd use us. God, just help us to be able to see people's needs. Help us to be able to turn over our hurts, habits, and hang-ups. Thank you, God, for wanting to use those. God, we love you. We want to be used by you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.